Hello, hello. On behalf of the Metropolitan Opera, welcome, friends. My name is Susan Blackwell, and I am acting as your moderator today. In offerance of accessibility and inclusion, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a Caucasian woman with long, straight silver hair. I'm wearing a fuzzy, pale gray shirt, and in the background in my Zoom square is a white curtain. And I'm coming to you today from Muncie, Lenape land. Presented by the Metropolitan Opera as part of our celebration of Women's History Month, we are hosting this series of conversations highlighting the work of world-class creatives who happen to identify as women. This is the second of three discussions occurring on consecutive Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and we have so many friends joining us today. Educators, supporters of opera, lovers of music, Met patrons, and subscribers. I want to give a special shout out to all the members of our Met HD Live in Schools community, especially our students. Whether you've attended a Met Opera broadcast of HD Live in Schools many times, or if you rocked the Met Opera Global Summer Camp with us, or if this is your very first time that you're joining us for a Met Opera event, we're so happy that you're here. And you are in good company. We've got folks zooming in from 5 continents. So hello to our friends in Zambia, India, Japan, Peru, and Fort Worth, Texas, just to name a few. Welcome, everyone. We are so happy to have you here. Today, we are talking to a wonderful artist, a composer named Missy Mazzoli. Missy, where are you? Will you reveal yourself? Turn your camera on. Missy, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy that we get to have this time with you. Missy, for accessibility and inclusion purposes, can you provide us with a little self-description?
Sure. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a white woman with long, wavy, brownish, depending on the day, hair. And I'm zooming to you from right from my composition studio. My Zoom background is believe it or not, a pink walled space with also some crazy wallpaper touches. And I'm talking to you from Lenape land.
Oh, wonderful. So I'm going to begin by asking you the question we have been asking everyone for the past year. Where are you right now? Which we know where you're in your studio. And how are you right now, but for reals?
I heard this term the other day, pandemic fine. So it's like, yeah, I'm fine. It's pandemic fine.
Pandemic fine.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's,
Yeah.
to state, what is the obvious to me, the first thing is such gratitude for having gotten through this in a healthy way, having most of the people around me get through this in a healthy way. And I'm so grateful that my parents are vaccinated. And so just like that is right today, that's at the fore. And, there are other days where the wave of cancellations is just at the front of my mind, and really feeling for my friends, particularly performers who are just, devastated, who are really having to make decisions about their life they never thought they'd have to make at this point in their great careers. So it's unbelievably hard. And so it's all there, and so the mix is sort of adding up to pandemic fine. And as a composer, I feel very lucky that I can work really almost in any situation. And so I've been very productive, and I'm grateful to have that just spiritually as something that I can return to every day.
Oh, yes, that's so true. Unlike, for instance, if you're an opera singer or you're someone who plays an instrument that, blasts air droplets into the environment, you are somebody who your work is well suited for a pandemic to a certain extent. The performing of it might not be, but the crafting of it actually, that's amazing. That is amazing. Just back to the question of where you are, and you mentioned this, you're in your studio, and I am just completely enamored with creativity and the creative process and how makers make and where they make. And I just love your studio. It looks so beautiful and so creative. So you've got some books on your bookshelf back there. Do you have instruments and a piano in your studio as well?
Yeah, one of the great things of this pandemic is something I've been meaning to figure out for a while is just the desk. There's all this like talk about what makes up our home office and how does that affect our work. And I was like crunching onto an IKEA table for the last 20 years.
I'm crunching on one right now, Missy.
You can get a lot done on like a really cheap IKEA table, but I was like, I'm spending most of my life in this corner of my apartment, so I might as well upgrade it. So I upgraded. I had there's this great actually opera singer / woodworker, Jason Sladen, tenor. I want to give him a shout out. And he created a desk for me. So like there's like a piano that sort of pulls out here and like right in front of me. And there's like this beautiful pine. And I wish I could, I'm not going to risk turning my camera around, but it's just a really beautiful, large space. I'm so grateful that I had this at this time.
I will be reaching back to you to get Jason Sladen's contact information. So maybe I can upgrade. But what an amazing thing for a composer to have a keyboard that just slides out like that. That's fantastic. Good work. So now we're going to kick into gear, Missy, with a game that we play. I always feel like I need to apologize to people for this. A game we play with all of our guests, which is called 60-Second Life Story. I'm going to put 60 seconds on a timer. You're going to tell me your whole life story. Don't leave out the awesome parts. Starting now.
Okay, so I was born in small town Pennsylvania, a town called Lansdale, not far from Philadelphia, but in my mind, we were in the middle of nowhere. And I started taking piano lessons at age 7, and it was like a transformational, epic religious experience, discovering classical music. And my parents were not musical. No one around me was musical. I didn't see my first opera until I was 19 and took the bus to the Met. But I loved playing music and grew up. I decided I was going to be a composer because I wanted to be inside of music. And I decided that before I even written any music. But it just works for me so well. I went to Boston University as an undergrad, then got a Fulbright grant to go study with Louis Andriessen in the Netherlands. And that was a really incredible experience in my early 20s. Came back to America, went to Yale, and then fulfilled my long-standing dream of moving to New York City, and moved here in 2006 and have not looked back. And had a series of really insane day jobs, sometimes 5 at once, I think was my record, when I first moved to New York, some music related, some not. And then in the last 15 years of being here, have just kept writing. And, a lot of what I do is opera right now, but that's really because opera is so massive, and just eats up your life. So like saying yes to writing one opera, that's 3 years of your life dedicated to one piece.
Yeah.
But, I'm still doing lots of other things. I still write lots of concert music for soloists, for friends. And I do film scores. I write for TV. I'm very active in teaching and mentoring. And I perform as a pianist, and I do a lot with electronic music. So it sounds like a lot when I list it, but, everything feeds everything else.
Yeah.
And, I'm really happy to be where I'm at. So I think that I left out a lot of awesome stuff. I used to be a tap dance instructor. I used to play bass in a punk band. Like there's all sorts of stuff. But
wow, you do contain multitudes. Before I forget, I just want to ask you, I love it when people talk about, we were talking with some great conductors last week, and they were talking about the times when it wasn't easy, when, the work wasn't, they were sort of like, I guess I'll hang it up because the work it just isn't showing up. What is the nuttiest temp job that you had? What's like the wackiest tap instructor is pretty, that's that one. But what kind of jobs did you have?
Oh my gosh. I mean, so my first year in New York, so this is 2006. was completely insane. I worked as a pianist for baby ballet classes on the Upper East Side.
Sure.
So it was Saturday and Sunday morning. I would wake up at 6 a.m. and take the train an hour and a half. Weekend subways, remember those? Like bad long trips, and play piano for these little kids. And it was fine. I was like, I'm getting a paycheck for playing piano. This is
Yeah.
amazing. And at the same time, I was taking shifts at Whole Foods as a cashier.
Yes.
And still know all those produce codes, like better than I know like most music theory at this point. And then I worked for a lawyer doing transcription. She was a copyright lawyer. So if bands or composers, mostly bands, felt that their music had been like stolen for a commercial,
Oh.
I would do a transcription of both, and then she would compare them in court. Insane. And then I was also a personal assistant. This is maybe more musically related. A personal assistant for the composer Derek Vermel and a personal assistant for the composer Meredith Monk.
Wow.
And so that was really phenomenal. I mean, Meredith is one of my closest mentors and the person who I look up to tremendously. And so that was great. So it wasn't all sort of grunt work, but it was a lot of stuff at the same time and still had no money. It was such a weird phenomenon.
I know, but it's living in New York is very expensive. I'm totally making this up, but I relish the idea of you on Friday and Saturday nights playing bass in a punk band, and then the following mornings, like having like literally to play piano for baby ballet classes. That's good origin story right there. When I was preparing for our conversation today, Missy, I discovered something that always fills me with delight. It came up recently when I spoke to Sir Richard Eyre, and it's happening again today. It's when I discover an artist who, like myself, grew up in a rural environment and eventually made their way to a very rich life in the arts. I grew up in rural Ohio. You grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, and there are participants who are watching today from all around the world, some of whom live in very rural environments. You just brushed this, but could you talk to us more about if you had a teacher, a friend group, a piano teacher, an epiphany, or some sort of life experience that really was the catalyst for you sort of becoming an artist and moving to the big city?
Yes, I was really lucky to have an amazing piano teacher very young. Her name is Kirsten Olson. And she's still so supportive. I have so much love for her. And she really, she was not like a very strict teacher, but she made me fall in love with music and with the stories of these composers and the stories of these pieces. So, music that it was written, because a composer was in love with someone, music that,
Yeah.
Thinking about like Haydn, like, in bed, like trying to practice piano without having his parents hear him. Like, it just like all these stories were really stuck in my brain. And she really brought the music to life through the story of the people who made it. And she encouraged me to write my own music, and was really one of the first people to see that. This is when I was like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old.
Amazing.
So that really made all the difference. And I found a community in like playing in bands, and playing piano. And like I played piano in our local orchestra every time they needed like the celeste part for like a Nutcracker. I've played like 45 million times, various, like community orchestras, Sugar Plum Fairy, like I'm here for you, and but it was very, if you're not sort of lucky enough to be near like a major cultural center that you're going to all the time, or like in the Juilliard pre-college program. I mean, these kids are so lucky who have a sort of organized education. And I had a great musical education. It was very haphazard. It was just me pulling from whatever was around me.
I also heard you say in a different interview that though your family wasn't really religious, that you loved going to church. And from time to time, your mom would take you to church And it was the closest thing to sort of a theatrical experience with music that you had exposure to as a younger person, which I thought was fascinating.
That's true. Yeah. It was mostly for the music. And then I found a sense of like theater and ritual in it. So like I grew up, I'm a composer and a pianist, and neither thing, you can't like really play in your school orchestra doing those things. I was and am a terrible singer. So I wasn't like singing in a choir. So trying to find a communal musical experience was really hard, just because of my instrument and what I was interested in.
Yeah.
And church weirdly provided that, even though I wasn't quite really conscious of it at the time. Like looking back, I was like, oh, that's why I kept wanting to do that. It was this ritual that I could take part in every week that was musical.
Yeah. It's interesting how that it seems like it's made its way into some of your music now with like the Vespers and things like that, that it's sort of woven its way in. It's very cool.
Mhm.
And then 19 years old, you saw your first opera at 19. You took the bus, did you say, to the Met to see it? What was the opera?
The opera was Wozzeck in 1999 at the Met. I was going to school at Boston University, and I fell in love with Berg and his music there, and heard that the Met was doing one of his operas and thought I should go. And it was really like, I mean, I was so green at the time, and like I bought a ticket, and it was in the last row.
Yes.
And there are these amazing, I love these seats at the Met where you sit in the last row and you can actually touch the gold ceiling behind you because you're so high up. And it was fun. And there were all these people who, had like rush tickets and were standing behind me the whole time. And I have such vivid memories of that production, even though it's like very small and like really in the distance. And I remember keeping that program and like poring over it, and just, it had a really, again, such a profound impact. And it was a whole a new world, a new community.
It's an amazing thing it feels very full circle. Will you talk a little bit about, now you have been commissioned by the Met, but it's even more remarkable because you're one of two women who have been commissioned for the first time in the Met's, I think it's 137-year history. So it's really remarkable, but will you talk a little bit about, it's amazing going from sitting in that last row, reaching up, touching the gold ceiling, and now you've been commissioned by the Met. Will you talk a little bit about that commission?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I have to give shout outs to Janine Tesori, who's the other woman to be commissioned recently by the Met. Like, we were the first two. Also, shout outs to Kaya Sariaho, who had L'Amour de Loin performed in 2015, and Ethel Smith, who was, was the first woman to have an opera at the Met in 1903. So, we're a mighty foursome, and I could not be happier to be part of it. And it's just opening up more and more. I know that the Met has announced new commissions from Valerie Coleman, Jessie Montgomery, and I'm just like, let it expand exponentially and very quickly, please. So this commission, this was a dream come true. Like, I dreamt of writing for the Met ever since I saw that opera at the Met. And even before, again, before I even knew what it meant to write an opera, I wanted to write for the Met. And it's such just, it had such significance for me as a kid. So when I got this opportunity, I remember I went into the meeting. I hope this isn't too much information, but I went into the meeting, and I didn't want to jinx it by like preparing. I don't know if you ever have this thing where it's like, if I prepare an idea, then they won't commission me. So if I just go in with nothing prepared, then like maybe good things will happen. And so I went in, and they said, we'd like you to write a piece for us. And I sort of blurted out Lincoln in the Bardo, which was the book that I'd been reading by George Saunders, who's my favorite writer. And he, this was a novel. I can't remember exactly when it came out, I think like 8 years ago. And it Royce Vavrick, my librettist and dearest friend, and I had been sort of kicking around the idea, like, oh, wouldn't that make a good opera? Like, but nothing really serious. And then when it came up in the Met meeting, I was like, this is my idea. And they were great, and everyone on the team said, like, oh, we'll go and read it and we'll get back to you. And it was immediately like, yes, it's a story that suggests opera to me in so many ways. It's a story, it's not actually about Abraham Lincoln, and certainly not deifying Lincoln. It's about so many other things. It's about our inability to accept death, the role of history, and what happens after we die, the grief of losing a child. The story centers around Lincoln's son, Willie Lincoln, died when he was 12 years old, and Lincoln would go and visit Willie's body in the graveyard. So this all takes place in a graveyard, and it's populated by ghosts. Abraham Lincoln is the only living character in this opera, and he's not the main character. It's populated by all these insane personalities that really showcase every aspect of human desire and want. And I can't say enough good things about it. And I'm giving you like a tenth of the story because the magic is in George's writing, which is, I've never read anything like it. It's such an amazing combination of funny, profound, he's that way as a person too. And he's been an amazing collaborator. And I think that opera is so surreal, just by nature. The nature of the genre is so surreal. Everyone's singing their thoughts. And so that's really weird and really cool. So I love operas that embrace the surreal aspects of that, instead of trying to like normalize it and pretend like everything's fine. We're just singing. Like that to me is really awesome.
It sounds like it's going to be so this word is so reductive, but it sounds like it's going to be really cool and really rich. There's so many interesting themes in that. And you were saying earlier, how long does it take to compose an opera? Like you said 3 years, but this is very complex, very nuanced subject matter. So what do you predict? Like all told, how long do you think it will take to compose this?
I'm sticking with like the 3-year thing.
Wow, good.
Yeah,
good for you.
It sounds really far away, but it is frightfully close for me. So we don't have exact dates planned, but just in terms of the composition, I think that there's a really beautiful workshopping process built into the creation of opera. So generally I'll write, this opera is 2 acts. And each act is just over an hour long. So I'll write one at a time. You write one act, you workshop that, you get feedback. It's not just me making decisions. It's my librettist, the director, the folks at the Met, like everybody is involved in bringing this to life. So the workshop is an opportunity to get that feedback. The singers who I want to write for specific singers. So like making something that really lets their voice shine. So that takes time, just learning an operatic role. I don't know how they do it. And I have so much respect for opera singers, but it takes a long time.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I actually think 3 years in terms of making things of quality takes a very long time. And 3 years, I'm like, that seems turbocharged. So I'm really, I'm very impressed. Yes, I am. I've never composed an opera, but it seems really speedy. Missy, you just finished another opera. Speaking of composing and completing operas, will you tell us a little bit about The Listeners?
Sure. Yes, happy to. So The Listeners is an opera that has been commissioned by Norwegian National Opera in Oslo and Opera Philadelphia. And we'll have a performance in those 2 houses and also in Chicago coming up. And The Listeners came out of my desire to write an opera based on an original story. So much of opera is adaptation. Even these hits like Carmen, that we think of as an opera first, like those were that was like a short novel, first. And so much of opera and history is adapted from other sources. And that's great. But, I was thinking like, this can't be opera's greatest and only destiny to tell stories that have already been told in other forms. I really wanted to create a story that had to sing first. And so my librettist, Royce Favrick, and I sort of put that challenge to our friend, the playwright Jordan Tannehill. He's a very young Canadian playwright. And he had never worked on an opera before, but he was like, I'm so interested in this. This is great. And I gave him basically like a grocery list of things that I was interested in. So I was like, it has to be something that needs to sing, whatever that means to you. And I'm interested in cults and the dynamics of cults. I'm interested in middle-aged women who find themselves in extraordinary situations unexpectedly. I'm interested in the American desert, and these communities that are like popping up around Las Vegas and like, where, there's not supposed to be water, but we've irrigated it. So there is. I gave him a list and he created a story that incorporated a lot of these elements. So the listeners tells the story of a woman named Claire, who's sort of like a suburban soccer mom living in the suburbs of Vegas. And she starts to hear a mysterious noise and it's plaguing her, day and night, and no one else in her family can hear it. And they think she's crazy, but she soon finds out that other people in the town can hear it. And a sort of self-help group forms to help people deal with the sound. And this self-help group initially is great, but then it takes on cult-like dimensions and all the sort of aspects of human behavior that go into that. So, manipulation and deception, but also a feeling of finding a great sense of family where you really need it. All these emotions are swirling around, and this opera gave me a chance to explore them.
Wow. It feels so timely as you were like talking about those. I love a good creative obstacle course, like you were just describing, that you were talking to this playwright and saying, here are these things. And they seem so fascinating and so timely. That again, it sounds it just sounds so rich and so interesting. How exciting. Congratulations on finishing it. Oh, what an accomplishment. It's huge. It's huge. Missy, you co-founded something called Luna Composition Lab. Can you tell us a bit about what it is and why you were moved to create this?
Sure. So Luna Composition Lab is a mentorship program that I founded in collaboration with the Kaufman Music Center, just down the street from the Met. And my sort of partner in crime with this is the composer Ellen Reed, who brilliant opera composer, amazing person, great friend of mine. She won the Pulitzer for her opera.
She won yes.
2 years ago. And we, in 2016, we were sort of noticing that there was so much lip service being paid to correcting the sort of gender imbalance in classical music, but like very few concrete steps forward. And I saw it very clearly as a two-pronged problem, where, not enough attention was being paid to very young composers who were, I should say, this is a program that supports female, non-binary, and gender non-conforming composers. And so I felt that there wasn't enough attention being paid to those composers when they were very young and in their teens. I teach a lot and I travel a lot around the country, or now via Zoom, and give lectures in colleges. And I never saw a freshman class that had a sort of balanced, gender equation. Or in terms of race, so it was like looking into the 19th century, and it's just, I thought something is discouraging these young people from entering the field when they're in their teens, and so we wanted to address that age group and also provide mentorship, because we also saw a lack of female role models as a problem. Most of the composers being programmed, the composers getting sort of prominent jobs in teaching or at conservatories, it's still overwhelmingly white men. So we thought if we could just connect these young people with a female or non-binary or gender non-conforming mentor, that it would accelerate things. and for them. And we've seen it happen. Like so many of the program has been around for 5 years, or 6 years now. And, we've seen our graduates go on to, enter the Curtis School of Music, Rice, Peabody, USC. They've gone on to some of the best music programs in the country, and they are soaring. They're getting commissions very young, and we were just able to elevate them. And Ellen and I, when we started to find success and have a platform, we were like, we don't want these young people to have to wait until they're 40 to feel like they have access. We just want to open the door.
Amazing.
It's not leaving the door open. It's just like pushing them through the door with us.
You're a person who gets a lot of stuff done.
Just thinking about
like you've done all the creative things that you have done and continue to do, and then to carve out space in your life and to take some of your capacity and the platform, the megaphone that you have developed, and to use it in this way and I know I just have this funny feeling that there are young people who are watching this right now and maybe learning about it for the first time. And it does open a door of possibility in people's minds. So I think I have chills. I just think it's so tremendous. Great work. Great use of your time. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And speaking of some of the people that are watching, we have some great questions from some of our students, and I'd love to share some of those with you. The first is from Sophie. Sophie is a 10th grader from Ontario, Canada. Hi, Sophie. So Sophie asks, how do you come up with your idea? This is such a good question, Sophie, by the way. How do you come up with your ideas, and where do you get your inspiration from? Well, maybe from under-preparing for a meeting with the Met, and then just like talking about one of your favorite books. But where else? Where do you get your ideas from?
I'm not recommending that as a strategy, by the way. Everyone listening, just be prepared at all times. Most of my ideas for operas come from human beings. So I know a lot of composers are inspired by nature, by math. There's by colors, like there's anything is fuel for inspiration. Sure. I am really inspired by people and all the crazy things they do. So that's why opera is such a great fit for me, because that's what opera is. It's like people enacting these really extreme situations on stage.
Yeah.
And so, I have a folder on my desktop called ideas. Every time I read an article or come across like a Wikipedia page, I'll like take a screenshot of it and put it in that folder. And when it comes time to think of what I'm going to do next, like I'll just reference that. So recently in my folder, there's this amazing story in the Times about women in Albania who grow up as men because the men in their village didn't survive the war. So to take the role of that they would fill in society, they would dress as men and live as men up until their 80s and 90s. So, and then there's my favorite Wikipedia page is list of unexplained sounds, if anyone wants to check that out. And I'll periodically check on that. And that was a big inspiration for the listeners.
For the listeners, yes. Just out of a question that I had that I'll ask now is how, if you want to talk about it, if you're like, come see the opera, how do you represent the sound that she can hear and that certain people can hear, but others can't? Is there a way, how did you represent that unexplained sound?
Yeah. So, it is going to be mostly electronic because, I want people, so it's a piece for big orchestra and choir and soloists. And so I want, when people hear, we call it the hum, when people hear the hum, I want them to know it's the hum. So that means that it has to be something outside of what they've been hearing for the first hour. And we don't, this is a spoiler alert, but you're all going to come to the opera, so it's cool. We don't hear the noise for the first hour. And so I love this psychological question of like, is it only in her mind? Is she totally insane? But then we as the audience hear it like right before intermission. So we're left with the question, are we also insane? Are we now inside her mind? Does everyone actually hear it? And it's just some people are like blocking it out. But yeah, it will be an electronic sound that is augmented by special effects in the orchestra.
Neat. That's really neat. And I just want to point back to something that Missy just said. That folder on Missy's desktop is what we would call a Spark file. And if you're interested in writing, it's a really good idea, whether it is a journal or something in your phone, someplace where if you have those ideas, you consistently can get them down, so that if you're somebody like Missy, or if you're a story writer or any type of artist, you can find your way back to them when the time comes, when you need one of those ideas. And I just wrote down in my Spark file this story about these Albanian women who live as men. I've never heard that before, and it's so sparkish to me. That's so interesting. So I'm totally putting that in my Spark file too. But I probably won't want to write an opera about it, so it'll be different from whatever Missy does with it. So that was a great question, Sophie. Carmen, who is a graduate student in Mexico City, asks, what is the beginning of your composition process like? And how do you know when a piece is done? This is such a good question, Carmen. So a little bit the life cycle of your creative process. What is the beginning of the composition process, and how do you know when a piece is done?
Yeah. So, and this is every composer will have a different answer. There's no right way to start or end a piece. And you really have to find what feels right for you. I'm a pianist, so I'm really interested in chords, harmonies, and so it's easier for me to write chords than it is for me to say, I'm going to start a piece at the beginning, or I'm going to write an amazing melody that everyone's going to remember. Like, that's too much, but I'm like, I know I can come up with 5 chords that make sense. So if I'm really stuck, or if I'm really just have the tyranny of that blank page where I'm just like suppressive, I will just write a couple chords and see where that takes me. And I'll also just brainstorm away from the piano. So like I have a million notebooks too, and I'll just write down every crazy idea that I have without judgment, So it's like, might be like singers singing underwater, or super high piccolo combined with super low double bass, like any sonic or theatrical ideas. And then that really starts me going. It's just about people say this is sort of a cliche at this point, but it's just about getting out of your own way. So it's, and with operas, if I'm writing a scene, I'll often start with the arias, because it's easier for me to think like, okay, I writing an opera, I have actually no idea how we do that or how I do it, but I know I can write a 3-minute song. That's it. And so I'll just start with like this really manageable task of like, this is a 3-minute song about someone who wants to be in love with this person, or is in love with this person, the other person doesn't love them back. Great. And then everything else sort of fills in around that. And then as far as how I know it's done is when like the deadline has whooshed by me and I'm feeling the pain of missing it. It's like, this has got to be in usually. And I'm not someone who revises after the fact. Like, so I will like revise and revise and revise and revise. And then it's just a feeling, I'm like, this is it. This is what it's supposed to be.
Great. That's great. Oh man. Good question, Carmen. Violet, who is a 4th grader from California. Hi, Violet. Violet asks, can you recommend a book or website for students who want to learn more about being a composer? This is such a good question, Violet. Do you have any thoughts about that, Missy? Are there any websites or books for people who are interested in composing?
Wow. Yeah. So, not to be like self-promotional here, but I would just, the Luna Composition Lab website. We're in the process of turning that into a great resource for people who have an inkling that they might be interested in composing, but maybe they've never written a piece, so they don't know what goes into notation. And so I would say start there and email us. We can provide you with more specific resources. Even I'm in the process, like on my list of things to do is to write out a paragraph about what is a composer. So we can put that on the site, because it's like, maybe you write songs for yourself to sing and you're like, but wait, am I a composer? Like, and there's all this sort of mystery about that word. And So just talking about like, what does it mean and how do we go about it? We also offer resources for classes like theory classes, music theory, notation, and just about how to learn the language for communicating your musical ideas to another person, which is not something we're born with. It's something we have to learn. And often you have to go outside of, whatever elementary school, middle school, high school you're in to find that. So lunacompositionlab.org, or it's on the Kaufman Music Center website. But if you Google Luna Composition Lab, then that's a great start. And there's also, I'm sort of like drawing a blank, but I think just like listening to a lot of music. There are also all these great YouTube videos of scores. So if you like a string quartet or something, maybe you heard it in a movie, maybe you played it in your school, maybe your friend played it for you. Like you can Google it, and like on YouTube, there'll be a score. You can just start to associate the notation with the sound. Yeah.
Smart. That's a great recommendation. Really, really good recommendation and good question, Violet. Valeria, who is a sophomore in Venezuela, asks, what female artist or woman in general inspires you? I thought that was such a good question. Thank you, Valeria, for that. So is there a female artist or a woman in general that inspires you?
Yeah, so many. I think definitely Meredith Monk. I always go back to her as a female composer who she changed my life by providing a path. Janine Tesori, another woman who inspires me, who also has a commission from the Met. She won a Tony a couple of years ago, and in her acceptance speech, she said, women have to see it to be it. And I think that that's true for everybody. Like it's once you sort of see someone doing something that's even close to what you want to do, it's like, oh, the path sort of opens up. And she did that for me. I'd also say Julia Wolf was a huge influence on me growing up. And the Austrian composer Olga Neuwirth, whose music sounds nothing like mine. So people are often surprised that I'm like in love with her because but it doesn't, you don't have to sound like someone in order to be inspired by what they do and how they're operating in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was asked to moderate these discussions celebrating female creatives, I was so excited about the prospect of speaking to the specific artists, but I felt a little, if I'm honest, I felt a little ambivalent about the woman part. When I think about my own identity, I think of myself as a human and a creative and a teacher, but woman is not necessarily what I lead with, which I recognized as a very privileged position because I live in a time and in a place where I enjoy liberties that many women don't. And I stand on the shoulders of women who, like you were just mentioning, that you could see them being it, so you could step into it. And I stand on the shoulders of women that came before me so that I have the luxury of maybe not thinking about or working as hard around the topic of being a woman. And you're doing work like that too, I feel like, with Luna Composition Lab, where you're creating space for people who maybe are seeing those possibilities for the first time. So with all of that acknowledged, I just wonder, I don't know that I would know how to answer this question myself, but I'll ask you, do you think that being a woman has made you better at any part of your work?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer it because I've always operated from that perspective. So I think that it forces you. I hope that this is changing, but when I was growing up and in school, I was the only undergrad who was not male in the composition department, like not even just in my year, but like overall 4 years. And
wow.
It's an isolating place to be. And I think that isolation is what I'd like to focus on. It's like that and getting over that is you're forced to define yourself often in unique ways to sort of get through that and to find a community that is not freely offered to you. And so I've seen that with my idols, Meredith Monk, Laurie Anderson, Julia Wolf, Olga. All these women have like, have sort of had no choice but to strike out and to do something that's wildly different. Because what self-respecting woman would remain in a system that is not supporting her? Namely, the academia I found was often unsupportive, and I think that is changing. And I love my students, and so I'm part of that system now, freely and happily, and I feel like I'm trying to change it. But yeah, I think I've also, but that this is all coming from a position of great privilege as a cis white woman who grew up, not in the most affluent of homes, but in a supportive home. Right. And I think that, my perspective, even just over the last 5 years of working with Luna Composition Lab, and, composers who are trans and who identify as non-binary, or non-conforming, just in talking to them and listening to them, I'm just opened up to their struggles, which are different and deeper and, often more isolating. And so I'm really happy that I can try to create this little utopia with the Composition Lab. This is how I want composition programs to look. And these are the people I want to support, because they need more support and need a community, because it is not just there in the ether for them.
It really is, not to be cliche, but as you're speaking, I keep thinking you are being the change that you want to see in the world. You are creating the change that you may have desired when you were coming up. And I just love it. I love it so much. So rock on. And I'll think about how I would answer that question too, because I don't know that I would know how to answer the question I just asked you. So thank you.
Well, I think that sometimes these awkward questions are great, because they lead us to interesting places, So I'm often torn about coming at things from the perspective as a woman, but I think it's important to talk about, especially if you're in a position of power, in a position of influence, or have a platform, even just like this webinar. So I appreciate the question.
Exactly. So this next question is a question for you, not as a musician or a composer, but just as a human being. And you may have touched on this in what you just said. If you could go back in time armed with knowledge that you now have, what would you tell your younger self?
I would definitely say that everything that, hey, Missy, you're going to be fine. And everything that makes you feel different or isolated or that you don't belong is actually the thing that's going to give you a career. And I say career, not to be careerist. That word is sometimes fraught for people. When I say career, I mean, financial security, which I felt in the last couple of years for the first time in my entire life. And a supportive community of people that makes me feel safe and accepted and appreciated. And, the ability to dream and not to be hemmed in by, the 5-day jobs and constant worries about money. So all that stuff became not because I was a good student or played by the rules, but it was because all these things that made me stand out. So I would just have encouraged my younger self to not worry about them and be a little weirder and to be just a little more free with and know that there is a security, even though it's not coming in the form of rich parents or a doctorate or all these things that seem to connote security in this field.
Yeah, I wish we could have t-shirts. I guess we can. We should have t-shirts printed that just say "Be weirder." I think that is a good message to send to our younger selves, but also to all the young people that are watching. Be weirder, truly. You're not. I've interviewed, I don't know, countless people over the past few decades. And that is a refrain that I hear over and over again from people like yourself and Lin-Manuel Miranda. It just rings in my ears. The things that make you feel sort of weird and different now are inevitably the things that are going to make you special and may even be play your cards right. Dream big. It may even be the things that make you stand out in your life later. So I love that. I love it. Love it. So we are experiencing this really, really special time here in New York. We can sort of feel spring in the air, and people are beginning to get vaccinated. And there is this, I'm experiencing, I'll just say, a palpable sense of possibility. So I want to look back for a moment, and then I want to look to the future. Looking back, you talked about this a bit in the beginning. Can you say a little bit more about what your experience of this pandemic time has been? It sounds like it's been very productive for you, and sometimes challenging. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been everything. In the beginning, especially like the early days in New York, when we didn't know what this was and we didn't know how it spread. We didn't know. I mean, it's just kind of baffling to look back and think how little we knew, and also how little we know right now, even as vaccines are coming out. So it's changed my perspective on that, and things that I took for granted as like sort of like that everything was going to naturally be fine. It's like, I don't know, it shook that up. So that's huge. But I was really grateful early on for, again, my community of peers that really stuck together. My librettist and I would walk 1.5 miles to his house every day in the early days of the pandemic because I didn't feel safe taking the subway.
Yeah.
And we would just work side by side just to be in another space with somebody in case things got tricky. And eventually they did, and we felt boxed in, and we were able to go stay with a friend a little bit outside of the city. And I'm so grateful for that. And that was an opera singer friend, Amelia Watkins. I want to shout out to her because she gave us like a little more space to be inside. And so, I felt the uplift of my artistic community as a sort of family group, which was really incredible. And yeah, I mean, I've poured myself into work. I've also poured myself into writing things to help performers. So like I just wrote a song for the amazing mezzo-soprano Sasha Cook, which she's recording on an album, and she conceived of this during the pandemic. And also the opera singer Zachary James, who was in Akhenaten as the sort of, he's super tall, was like massive, like I'm forgetting his character's name, but you'll know him when you see him.
Super tall guy. Yes.
Super tall, bald guys. Zach James, love you. So it's like, and these singers are feeling the pinch more than I am, and so like I'm happy to write a song. I have a few skills, and writing songs is one of them. So if that helps uplift someone, then that's what I can do.
Nice. Are there things that you've learned about yourself, or ways of being, ways of working, ways of engaging that you've discovered during this pandemic time that you'd like to hold on to even after we return to whatever the new normal is?
Well, I mean, I'm going to get complaints about this because everyone's sick of it, but I don't mind the Zoom stuff. I feel like I
feel the same way. I feel you.
Like,
yeah.
I'm usually traveling all the time. And so I'm not able to be in a lot of places at once. And so in terms of reaching young people and providing a community and less isolation for people, this is fine. And I don't want this to be exclusively the way that we communicate. It's not a substitute for in-person communication, but for example, at Luna Lab, we have an annual festival, and in normal times we bring all of our students to New York for a week of rehearsals, concerts, lunches, performances. They went on a tour of the Met, went on a tour of National Sawdust, a great venue in Brooklyn, like just an immersion in the music scene in New York. And, we can't do that, but we've augmented the program to include masterclasses from people all over the country. And we have one coming up on March 24th with the amazing composer Inti Figgis-Vizueta. She is amazing. And these people are really busy. So like getting them on Zoom is great. I've been able to reach out to more people on Zoom. So I'm hoping we can keep that a little bit. And also I love the raised awareness. This is a huge topic, but the pandemic has laid bare a lot of inequalities in this country. Yeah. And a lot of the ways that artists are at the mercy of so many things out of their control. And I hope that this leads to change and an increased sense of a security net for performers and artists.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you look forward, you have so many cool things cooking. Like as you look forward to the future, what is exciting to you? Like what is just really thrilling to you? And please, it doesn't have to be one thing, as many as you care to share.
So much. I'm looking forward to so much. I feel so lucky. Like not to be so focused on music because I do have other parts of my life. But thinking about getting back in the rehearsal studio with these collaborators who I've been working with from afar. The director Liliana Blaine Cruz, she's directing The Listeners. My librettist Royce. Raja Feather Kelly is choreographing our new opera. Like I'm like so desperate to just like have a sandwich with these people. So that's it. That's really the thing that I'm looking forward to most. And like I'm going to be able to see my family in a couple of weeks. And so that is like sort of all I can think about right now. And just again, like reemerging and helping others it's particularly younger musicians. Again, my focus has always been on early education and composers who are just emerging into this insane field. But helping them emerge back into a better place. Like there's no returning to the normal because that normal wasn't good for most people. And we found that out in a really fast and visceral way. So I want it to be better. And I will continue I've been empowered to be more vocal about that too.
Missy, you are just a delight. You are so fun to talk to. Before we let you go, is there anything else that you want to share with these folks who are gathered? Anything that you want to share with the young people who are listening to the sound of your voice right now?
I just want to say, like, email me, like, let's reach out. Like, I'm findable. I'm slow on email, but I'm here for you. And, that's another thing that I wished I had done as a young person. I wished I had reached out to people who could have helped me. I felt pressure to figure it all out in my little brain and then like just do everything perfectly. And that's too much pressure. That's not real. And so I would just say that. And I would just say, like, to any young person listening who has any interest in opera, like, you give me life. I think I came to opera initially partially through music videos and just wanting immersive multimedia environments. And so however you're finding opera, that is totally great. And like, let's make it better and let's go crazy and let's make it a wilder field that is relevant to people of all ages.
Oh, I love it. Missy, you give me life. You give all of us life. Oh, you really are. It is such a pleasure to talk to you. And on behalf of the Met Education team and the Metropolitan Opera, I just want to thank you. I want to thank our guest, composer, performer, mentor, awesome human being, Missy Mazzoli. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really great.
You're great. And we'd also like to thank Lydia Perez for providing closed captioning services today. Thank you, Lydia. I know your fingers were flying. And we'd like to thank all of you for being here. And we hope that you'll join us next Friday, March 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. That's 1 p.m. New York time for a conversation with, this is going to be a good one. Stage directors Susan Stroman and Mary Zimmerman. These are two award-winning artists whose work has been seen on the Met Opera stage and around the globe. They are both such smart, fascinating people, and we're so delighted that we get to spend an hour talking with them. If you haven't already registered, you can do so at metopera.org/education. That's metopera.org/education. And anyone who has a question you'd like me to ask to our guests next week, please email it to hdschools@metopera.org. That's hdschools@metopera.org. Students, I'm looking at you. You know, I love those good questions that you send. They're always so, so good. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you next week. Bye, Missy. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Hi, thank you.